sure, and perhaps Thanksgiving. I'm not sure there's one more important, any more important than Veterans Day. And we are celebrating Veterans Day today. It's a day where you would hope each and every American, it doesn't matter where you are politically, irrelevant. We say thank you to all of those who have served in the past, are serving currently, and those that will serve in the future, the United States of America. People who died for our freedom, died for the right to do shows like this, died for the right to live and prosper in the greatest country there has ever been in the history of mankind. So on this Veterans Day, we say thank you to the men and women of the United States military, those past, current, and future. Luke, good morning. How's everything at Indiana University?
It's good. Good morning. I don't think too much can go wrong here right now. I feel like we talk about this every single week, but the football team keeps winning. Everyone's waiting for Tuesday night around here where the next college football playoff rankings come out. And I hate to be optimistic because I am covering the team and I try to not be a fan, but this is a team that could end up not in the top four in regard to obviously how it works out with the standings and if you win the Big Ten or all the Power Fours, you get that bye. But this is a team who in the AP poll was just put into the top five, and they have a chance to be quote unquote number four in the country because I think they're better than Penn State and have a better resume than Penn State by a landslide. But I mean, there's still plenty of college football outside of that. I did not talk about this when we were talking before the show because I wanted to save it for our audience. If my math is correct, and we typically wait till Thursday to talk about stuff like this,
oh boy, here we go.
First place leader the entire week in the pick'em, went a whopping 2-5 this week. This would now make it 3 straight weeks for me going 5-2. And we have a tie at the top, 38-1 and 38-1. We are now tied in the pick'em standings. So on Monday morning, a lot brighter because of that news.
All right. We will get to all of that by the end of the show. That's fine. You're on a good run. I was on a good run early. Casey has not found a good run. And we'll update the standings and go through our picks from over the weekend. You know, I guess that what's happening to me is I'm picking the right teams by and large to win the game. But these spreads are killing me, at least killed me over the weekend. Casey, good morning. Hope all is well with you. Are you in somewhat a state of depression, knowing that Mr. Acosta from FC Cincinnati was hinting the other night that, I'm wondering if this run at FC is over?
Depression. I think I'm in a state of just utter misery in terms of my fandoms. So I think it's just par for the course, Tom. Acosta wanting to get out of town. Next guy on that list is probably Joe Burrow. So it's just right now, Cincinnati sports fandoms is just in misery. Good morning. Good morning. Tough loss for FC. You can't miss 3 penalty kicks in a row and expect to win there like that. And on top of that, they were without Miazga for most of the season. They weren't 100%, and they didn't. They swung and missed on the guys that they brought in mid-season to try to help Acosta. So it just didn't work out this year. Unfortunate. Very unfortunate for FC.
Yep. They won the first game in a best of 3 and then dropped 2 in a row to New York. Their season is done. We come your way twice a week, as you know, live here on Mondays at 9 o'clock on Chatterbox Sports. We post later in the day on the Believe Network. And on Thursday, we're at 5 after 12 Eastern Time. You can find us. Many of you are here already, hundreds, if not by the thousands, jumping on board on YouTube, our Chatterbox Sports page. You can download us anytime, anywhere. Just search up Dialed In with Tom Brenneman, and you're dialed in. Okay, look, the Bengals game last Thursday night is pretty much old news on a Monday. All right, but our last show was Thursday morning. So we have not talked about it here on Dialed In, and we will in a matter of moments. It was an amazing game to watch. It really was. Heartbreaking, yes, but amazing game to watch. The highs, the lows, the back and the forth. Luke and I, you and I were texting. You had an offense which for a lot of the night was just breathtaking. Burrow and Chase, it was amazing. And other parts, pretty puzzling, at least in my mind. We'll get to that in a second. The defense, meanwhile, which was so solid in the first half, suffered a collapse of epic proportion in the second half. I mean, every time Baltimore had the ball, they go right down the field and score, barely needing a handful of plays, and in some cases not even needing a handful. The bottom line is Baltimore sweeps the season series. Lamar is now 10-2 against the Bengals, and their record sits at 4-6. Now, having said that, all right, it's like yesterday was gloomy and dark, rainy all day. First time we've had one of those for a while, but thank God we needed it. But you wake up today, it's a beautiful sunny day. And believe it or not, the Bengals are in a tie for the final wild card spot with Indy. Indy? Playoffs? Are you kidding? The Colts hold a tiebreak edge right now, but this season is by no means over. And we're going to talk about that. Then there's college football, which for my money, maybe many of you disagree. I think that college football this year has been more appealing than the pro game. That's just my opinion. You may disagree, and you might be right. Unbeaten Miami goes down. And I got to tell you, I've seen Georgia Tech this year. Their starting quarterback missed the last 3 games, Haynes King. This guy is a really good quarterback. He can throw, he can run. He came back against Miami. I was not surprised Georgia Tech won that game. Georgia Tech is a very good team and would be in the hunt for an ACC, perhaps title game appearance, had King not gone down. You get Georgia, who, I mean, outside of one half against Alabama, right? That second half when they made the comeback, eventually lost. But I got to tell you, they have not looked good the entire year. And they were awful against a surging Ole Miss team on Saturday. Ohio State rolled. Indiana got its first scare of the season, and it was the defense that won the game against defending champion Michigan. Now, the first college football playoff rankings, Luke mentioned it, were released last week. Today, we will tell you who we believe should be in the college football playoff. One final note, they're having visitation. That rolls into yesterday into today for Pete Rose at Great American Ballpark. The lines were down the street on Joe Nuxall Way, around the corner on Mering Way, as fans had a chance to say goodbye to the hit king, Peter Edward Rose. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Fellas, before we get to the Bengals and our college football picks, there were a lot of other games in the NFL yesterday that were just unbelievable. I tell you, man, and I keep saying it, I've been saying it for 3 weeks, they were terrible last night, yet they find a way to win. The Detroit Lions. How about the way that game ended last night? They looked like they had no chance to win that game. And then all of a sudden, bang, they won the game. Luke?
I think something super underrated about the best teams in football, especially the NFL, is how dominant they are in every single aspect of the game. For example, the undefeated Kansas City Chiefs, and you have to chuckle when you say that. The fact that they have been able to do what they have been able to do at the end of games for 9 straight Sundays now is unbelievable. And when I see that Denver has, a mid-tier 40-yard field goal to win the game, there's just something in me that has watched enough Kansas City Chiefs football, especially at Arrowhead, where I'm saying the numbers here just might not be right. An NFL kicker to make a 40-yarder is probably, 70, 80%, but that just kind of feels off. And what do you know? The defensive line collapses in the Lions game. How about a kicker hitting a 58-yard field goal inside of the final minutes of the game? And then he turns around and hits a 52-yarder, which had arguably even more pressure on him because, you just hit the one to tie it. But if you miss this one at the buzzer, then the game goes to overtime. So I think it's the ability of these teams where even if they don't bring it, and we know the Lions didn't bring it yesterday because they're the best offensive team in football. They have the best playbook. They have the best play caller. And they looked stagnant throughout pretty much 70% of that game, I would argue. And for the fact that they pulled out that win, it's just that's called winning on every level. If your offense isn't there, their defense completely
Yep.
tightened up in the second half. Their special
Yep.
teams tightened up. Kansas City did the same exact thing. They had to rely on their defense. And I hate to say it and bring it up, but that's something that the Bengals have failed to do all year. When their offense put Evan McPherson and the special teams in a position to win the game against the Ravens, they missed it. When their offense put them in a position to win the game against the Ravens, their defense blew the game. And then, you could turn around and look all over the rest of the scores. Sometimes when their defense put the offense in the position, next thing you know, Joe Burrow and those guys, I feel like it's impossible to rip them. But the ability to play complementary football, and if you can't really rely on one side of the ball and they pick you up, is something that the best teams in the league consistently are doing.
Yeah.
And I think
There's
that's what
no
happened
doubt.
last night.
There is no doubt about it. I mean, they find a way, these teams. You just look at yesterday, right? You mentioned Kansas City. And Kansas City's offense, man, is really struggling. It is amazing to me that team is undefeated. What is it, 3 or 4 now games that have come down to the final play of the game and they've won them all. They know how to win. They just win. The Steelers, meanwhile, who've had to use 2 quarterbacks this year, they did not look particularly good yesterday. But again, they find a way on the road to win a game against a good Washington Commanders team. And then, as we just mentioned, Detroit. Something's missing in Houston. This was a team, I know they're playing a first-place schedule, and we talked about this last week. But something's missing there. Something's off. I know they've had some injuries like everybody else. And I think, this next Bengals team, which we're going to get into here in a second, for me, Jim Harbaugh is a landslide winner for NFL Coach of the Year. For this team to be 6-3 on the year, and the Bengals will see them on Sunday out west, and they move that start time, it'll be on Sunday night. It is staggering because if you go back to the beginning of the year, they had to let go a lot of guys because they had made such a mess of their salary cap situation. And Harbaugh comes in there, and it goes to show you, man, for the people who say coaching doesn't matter, I would challenge them to say, you got to be out of your mind. Because he has brought an attitude and a toughness and a will, like Dan Campbell to Detroit, of saying, hey, you're talking about two franchises now that have never won a Super Bowl. The Lions in the old days won a championship. But the Chargers have never won a Super Bowl. They're like the Bengals, never won a Super Bowl. The Lions have never won a Super Bowl, and their history is just as bad as the Bengals. And yet, all of a sudden, they bring in one guy at the top. And look at the way, Casey, things have changed for those two franchises in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think Harbaugh is one of the best coaches in football and has been for quite some time. And you can see what he's done. You've already said it. You've already explained it. They're winning with limited talent after they had to get rid of a lot of guys. They had to make a lot of tough decisions. They got rid of most of their receiving core from previous seasons. The defense, they lost a key couple pieces. And on top of that, they've had a lot of injuries to deal with too this season and still managed to have an above 500 record. And they sit comfortably in a wild card spot right now. Justin Herbert playing pretty good football right now. And that's really what it takes. It takes a decent quarterback playing good football, a good head coach, and a team that believes in those key pieces to rally around them and play complementary football. And that's what the Chargers are doing right now. Awesome to see. Hopefully the Bengals, when they play them this upcoming Sunday on Sunday Night Football, they can find ways to win. Because right now all they've done is find ways to lose.
You know what they bring, those two teams, and Mark Fetter said it, but there's a toughness about those two teams that the Bengals lack. I'm not saying the Bengals don't have tough guys. If you're playing in the NFL, I don't care who you're playing for, you're a tough guy. Okay, let's be honest about it. But it's the mental part of the toughness that those two teams have. And I'm not going to put Kansas City in their group because they're on a different level. They've won back-to-back Super Bowls, but there's just something about watching those two teams play where you just know. It doesn't mean they're going to win every game. Obviously, they've lost. But there's just a toughness that I wish this Bengals team had. All right, let's get to the Bengals game because we got a lot to get to today. So, before we talk about the Chargers again and the game coming up this week and the playoff hopes, which are still very much alive for the Bengals. I mean, look, normally I come on the show and sometimes I can see the glass half full. But I got to be honest. I mean, half empty. I got to be honest. I'm looking at it a little more half full right now. Now, that could change dramatically after Sunday night. All right, I'm leaving the door open for change. But let's take a look at this. Someone commented that the Bengals would not be in the playoffs. I did not say they would be in the playoffs. Okay? Take a look at this. So 8 teams go. Okay?
Seven go.
I thought the top 8 teams went.
The top 7.
Okay. No, there's 14 total teams.
All right, top 7. You're a game back. You're a game back of Denver, who's 5-5. You technically are still behind Indianapolis because of your conference record. You can see the third set of numbers moving left to right has your conference record. Denver has the same record as the Bengals at 2-4. Indianapolis right now would lead the Bengals because the Colts have a record of 3-4. Okay? So, the Bengals play Denver this season. They play them later in the year. And the Bengals, of their final 7 games this season, 6 of them are against teams in the AFC. The only game they play outside the AFC is when they take on the Cowboys. And, of course, the Cowboys looked awful. And they're going to be without, as we know, without Dak Prescott. So the look of that game now all of a sudden has a whole different feel. But, fellas, you go back to the Baltimore game for a minute. And we'll get into the playoff game in a second. But Luke, your overall thoughts at the end of the day, now that 4 days, 5 days nearly have gone by, you reflect back on that game and you say what?
Well, I look back on that game and I say everyone in the AFC sure as hell doesn't want the Bengals to make the playoffs, because if you get that offense and that second half and that Joe and Jamar orange juice type of connection that we saw, that is not the last team that you want to see sneaking in the postseason. However, the Bengals are going to have to play better. I mean, there's no argument that this team in this position right now, from the outside looking in, should make the postseason. I really think that they should, and it's going to come down to coaching. They find themselves as underdogs on Sunday Night Football. I don't really understand how that makes sense because the books have loved the Bengals this year, and that makes me think it is a glaring coaching issue. Maybe everyone's completely given up on this defense and saying they are as bad as they are through 10 weeks of the NFL season. But if you look at the schedule, not much more can go for you. You have the Chargers, yes, on Sunday Night Football. That is right now the biggest game of the year, in my opinion. Not just because it's the next game, and that's what every head coach says, and that's typically the truth, but I think that's the biggest game of the year because you get a full week off before the hardest game that you have left, and that's the Steelers. So you couldn't ask for a better bye week. I think this team needs a break. So then you play the Steelers at home, and the Cowboys stink. The Titans stink worse. The Browns arguably stink worse. And then you got to go win a big one at home against the Broncos. And, hey, we don't really know where they're going to be at that point. The Broncos are a team that could lose 4 in a row before then, or the way they're going right now, they could be coming off a win against the Kansas City Chiefs if they could make a field goal. So I think that the Bengals find themselves as favorites in 4 of these final games, maybe even 5, depending on how they're playing the rest of the year. So at that point, I look at it as you control your own destiny. Go win the games that you're supposed to win. Go do what you necessarily haven't done the rest of the season. And for how bad it has been, after seeing that graphic, guys, I think I'm going to sleep a lot better at night the rest of this week.
Well, look, and you hate to do this because there's so much season left, but you got to do it. It's what we do, right? You got to do it. You look at the Broncos schedule; they've got to play the Falcons. And the Falcons, I mean, people who get excited about the Falcons. I mean, I've said this for years. As a guy, Kirk Cousins is a great guy. Okay, and there are games where he can look like the best quarterback in the league, but the Falcons are the most head scratching team, in my opinion, in the NFL. So the Broncos have to play them, but they got them at home. They got the Browns and the Raiders, who both stink, right? But they play the Colts, the Chargers, the Bengals, and the Chiefs again. They got the Chiefs at home last game of the season, on the road against the Bengals, or on the road against the Chargers, and they got the Colts at home. So, look, this is a good team. It's a good story in Denver. They should have won the game yesterday. Bo Nix has been better, I think, than a lot of people thought he would. But the door is wide open. But the question is, Casey, at 4-6 and seeing what we've seen, do you really believe the Bengals are capable now of getting to 9 wins? Because at the beginning of the year, we were saying you got to get to 10 to get in the playoffs. The way the AFC has gone this year, I'm not sure it's 10 anymore. You'd like to get to 10, which means you have to go 6-1 in your last 7. But you might get in at 5-2. Do you think the Bengals are capable? I mean, I really mean this. Do you think they're capable of winning 5 out of 7 games?
Tom, I do think they're capable. They got to start winning these close games, though. If they can't finish out games, then what's it matter? They're currently like 0-5, I think, this season on one-possession games, something to that extent. And it's just not going to cut it. It's just not going to cut it. I think that, like Luke said, they're probably going to be favored in 4 or 5 games the rest of the season. This Chargers game, if they can win that game, I think that there's a good chance that they could probably split with Pittsburgh. And if they split with Pittsburgh, I really love their chances the rest of the way. I don't have a lot of confidence in the rest of those teams throughout the season. You're talking about guys that are unproven quarterback play or just miserable teams in general, like Will Levis and the Titans, or the Browns and Jameis Winston, or Cooper Rush, I think, with Dallas. There's just a very favorable couple games coming up for them that they can really start to stack some wins. And so if they can just take care of business against the Chargers, I think that we can start to see them truly become a playoff contending team. I think that 9 wins probably does get you in, and that means that they still have about 2 losses left in them. And I think that, like I said, you split with Pittsburgh, you get one more gimme game, and they're fine. So I think the most important games, though, Denver for sure, and the Chargers. I think they absolutely have to win those games to have a secured spot if they do take care of business the rest of the way and they don't stumble and stub their toe throughout the rest of the season. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see. It's going to be a tough game coming up this Sunday.
All right. I tell you the thing that worries me the most, and the thing that I came away from that game on Thursday night, but I have to tell you, and I thought Zach Taylor's comments after the game were complete tone deaf, or actually the next day in his press conference. Joe Burrow's getting killed.
Absolutely.
He is getting killed. I said a minute about tough guys. That is a tough man, Joe Burrow. And a couple of things he gets so overlooked about his game. And the passing is incredible, but the way he's able to maneuver around the pocket when there's pressure seemingly every single time he drops back, not every now and again, but his ability to run a little bit and escape trouble and get sacks, and his toughness. And people have talked about him being injury plagued. I have too. And look, you have to be honest about it. You can say they're freak injuries, whatever they are, but the bottom line is he's been injured in 2 of his 5 years in the league, this being the 5th. But I just don't know how much longer he can keep going getting hit the way he's getting hit. I mean, what was it, 14, 15 times the other night? I mean, sooner or later, and you pray to the Lord above, but sooner or later, one of these you don't land right. I mean, we're sitting here talking about the Bengals trying to get in the playoffs. How about the Bengals trying to protect Joe Burrow from getting killed?
Yeah, that was a nightmare on every single level Thursday night, and the fact that you have nothing to show for it makes it hurt that much worse, I'm sure, for him. I mean, we're also ignoring the fact that these weren't just QB hits; these were blatant. I mean, the
Yep.
Marlon Humphrey hit took the soul out of me when I saw that. He's getting people grabbing into his eyes. He's falling down on that wrist again. I just have to give him my flowers for how tough he was. It really felt like a Captain America put Cincinnati on your back on Baltimore on a dark, gloomy Thursday night and go win a football game. And we were a 2-point conversion away from doing that. But taking away the game, they have to protect him better. I don't really know. I think you can't necessarily scold the Bengals in the sense of they went out and have tried to protect him the last two off seasons. They really have. That's one thing that they have tried to do. They've brought in offensive linemen. I think they've dealt with injuries. They've dealt with guys who have really let them down consistently. And that's something that
Yep.
the Ravens are trying to do. I mean, they've said it in post-game press conferences. Marlon Humphrey, the guy who had the dirtiest hit on Burrow of the week, he said last year, when you play the Ravens, you might get hurt when Joe ended up going down. And I guess that's Baltimore's identity. You got to respect playing with toughness, but it's a divisional game, and the Bengals need to protect their guy better. I want to move on, though, and bring up one last point before we turn to college football in a couple minutes from now. We keep talking about the Bengals and their chances to make the postseason. I'll ask the chat this because I firmly believe it. I'm looking at the schedule right now on my laptop. The Bengals should make the postseason. They should win 9 games because at this point in the year, you are a joke of a team with the roster that they have and what they've proven they can do from the offensive side of the ball. If you can't beat the Cooper Rush Cowboys, if you stub your toe against, I can't even bring up a name with the Titans because they start a new quarterback every week, so maybe Will Levis. The Browns, it's like you can lose 2 of these games and still make the playoffs. You can split with the Steelers and choose one of the AFC West teams that you want to lose to, and you're still probably going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
So at that point, I mean, I look at that and I'm going to say yes. If the Bengals don't make the playoffs, even with a 4-6 record, this season is a complete failure. You could say it's already a failure, but I'm going to double down on that. And I'm also going to bring up the fact that look at just how night and day the NFC and the AFC are. Like the
Yeah.
Bengals position at 8 and 9 with Indy, that's San Francisco and LA, both with like very quality wins on their schedule. Seattle all the way down at 11. How about Tampa Bay at 12? They played the
Yep.
Chiefs into overtime. They played the 49ers into a last-second field goal as 6-point underdogs without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin for back-to-back weeks. I would make the argument that the New Orleans Saints could beat a lot of these teams in this mid-tier of the AFC, and then obviously the teams that are in, like Washington is the 6th seed. Washington would beat every single one of the Chargers. I would say they beat the Texans, they beat the Broncos, they beat the brakes off the Colts, they beat the Bengals, they beat the Jets. I mean, the NFC is worlds better than the AFC. But I will say, I do think the Bengals can still sneak in, and that's a team you don't want to see in the playoffs. So I guess that's enough
I
Bengals
just
talk for
wish.
me.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had the faith you do. I've just watched them too much, and to think that they've lost to New England, and that game may ultimately come back and bite them right in the tail, because it might come down. It might come down. I want to believe they can do it so badly, but I just, even the game this coming week. I mean, the Chargers just come at you, man. They're doing it in a totally different way than the Bengals are doing it in terms of what they're asking from their quarterback. And Harbaugh walked in there and said, "We are going to run the ball. We have Justin Herbert. Some feel like he's one of the top 7, 8 quarterbacks in the league. Some believe he's better than that." All they've done in Herbert's career is throw the ball 40 times a game. And they got their tails kicked on a regular basis. Right? Harbaugh walks in the door, and he's got Herbert throwing the ball about 18 or 20 times a game. And he's saying to Herbert, complete the passes you're supposed to complete. Don't turn the ball over. We're going to play good defense, and we're going to run the ball with guys who have been cast off by other teams. J.K. Dobbins, see you later. All of a sudden, he's in the top 10 in the NFL in rushing. I just don't know. If the Bengals can go out and play. We're talking about toughness, and you talked about the schedule the Bengals have the rest of the way. Toughness, the Steelers. Undeniably, toughness. They got to play them twice, right? The Chargers, toughness. That's 3 of your last 7, almost half of what you got left. Do I believe the Bengals can go 3-0 in those games? I have a hard time believing that. Do I believe they can go 2-1 in those games? I have a hard time believing it. I hope they can, but I don't know. All right, let's shift gears, fellas, to college football. The first college football playoff rankings came out last week. And I think a lot of people were really, really surprised about certain teams in particular. Luke, you mentioned Indiana being one of them, behind Penn State. And I don't get that at all. Penn State lost on their home field, granted, to the number 2 overall seed Ohio State, but they've lost. Indiana has not lost. Now, Indiana, for all intents and purposes, their biggest quote-unquote signature win was over the weekend against Michigan. And it's a 500 Michigan team. But as I told you, Luke, before the game, Michigan still got great players. They got great players, 4 and 5-star guys all over the field. But Jim Harbaugh's gone. So, for Indiana not to be ahead of Penn State. But let's get to who we believe would be in. And, Luke, I want you to start this. Again, 12 teams go. Bear in mind, for all of you at home, some of you know this, some of you may not. Okay, and we're not putting them in a seeding ranking because unless you're able to see a graphic in terms of a bracket, it's hard to understand. But each of us will walk through with you. But the bottom line is you have to take the conference champ from the Big Ten. You have to take the conference champ from the SEC. You have to take the conference champ from the Big 12, and you have to take the conference champ from the ACC. Outside of that, you take one non-Power 4 team, and if Notre Dame is in the hunt, which Notre Dame is in the hunt, they can be taken as an independent. Luke, take it away. Who you got?
Okay, well, I think I'm going to do this and then I got to run because I have class, so I'll leave the rest of the show for you guys.
Okay.
I think you have to keep Oregon in that one spot, although they are either going to play Ohio State or Indiana. I think that they probably win both of those games. In the 2 spot with the SEC, it does get really tough because the conference rankings, a lot of teams are still alive to play in that game that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Tennessee is a 1-loss SEC team. A&M is a 1-loss team. And then you obviously have Texas. So I am going to put Texas there to win the SEC. The Big 12 is really interesting to me, and I think people aren't talking about it enough. They keep throwing BYU into that spot. Like Colorado isn't also 5-1 in the conference. BYU is undefeated. But I think that BYU has been tested by some pretty ugly teams. They escape and get what was called a stolen win by the Utah AD this week to remain undefeated. Whether you want to say that or not is up for grabs. But people keep throwing them in there just because they're undefeated and highly ranked like there's some lock. I don't think BYU is nearly as dominant as some of these other teams. And then you kind of move in to the obvious teams that are still going to make it. I think that Penn State will find their way in because they don't have to play anyone the rest of the year. Tennessee is going to make it. Hopefully their quarterback's okay. The biggest sneaker of all time that I think isn't going to get a bye and can still win the whole thing is Notre Dame. I think they are the only team that has a chance to make the postseason that won't get a bye, that has a chance to win. They have one bad loss this year. It was very ugly, but that is a really good football team. And Bama's going to make it. With that win against LSU, they're going to stay the course, do what they do all year. The expanded playoff is huge for the SEC because now Ole Miss is in the mix, and then kind of rounding it out. I think SMU has a real chance to win the ACC when you look at that bye. I know Casey has a take coming up about somebody else, so I'm not going to spoil that. Boise State in the group of 5 teams that make it is going to be my pick. I think they're consistently the best team with their rushing attack. They're actually a really good team. And then Georgia and Miami should fill out the top 14 just with their resumes. And they deserve to be in the college football playoffs, even with Miami with 1 loss and Georgia with 2. I think so. But I got to run. So I'll see you guys
I
on
know you do.
Thursday.
All
And
right, my man.
so long.
All right. See you, buddy. Have a great day. Great seeing you. The Big B. Casey, do we have graphics for these picks or no?
I do not have graphics made for
Okay.
these.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Moving forward, we're going to bracket them up a little bit and see where all of this goes. Luke mentioned BYU. Look, the only loss SMU has the entire year was against BYU. SMU is undefeated in the Atlantic Coast Conference. And that was a 3-point game back in September, the second game of the year. BYU has hammered, by and large, everybody since then. And you can say, well, their schedule. Okay, well, at the time, they played Kansas State, who was ranked. Baylor was playing well early in the year. But the Big 12's down. And BYU got a break this weekend against Utah. They should have lost the game, but they got Kansas, a decent Arizona State team, and Houston the rest of the way. They're not going to lose. Arizona State's the only wild card in that thing. Arizona State's not too bad. All right, Casey, walk me through who you have.
Okay, so I have a couple big upsets. I'm going to start off with my conference winners. I have Ohio State winning the Big Ten. I think that I do think that they're the number one team. They played Oregon all the way up to the final seconds of that game, was in a position to win it. If he just gets down a second sooner and they call a timeout, who knows what ends up happening there. At a neutral site, I like Ohio State's chances. I currently have Tennessee winning the SEC.
Wow.
I don't believe
Tennessee.
I don't believe in Georgia. I just think that those two play each other coming up. I think it's this next week that they play.
It's this Saturday, yes.
And I think Tennessee handles business. They take care of Georgia. That completely gets Georgia out of the playoffs with 3 losses on the season. And then you're looking at Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas. I think one of those 3 teams obviously will lose to Tennessee, but I don't think that – I think it'll probably end up being Texas, and that will keep them in the playoff conversation, probably around like the 10 to 11, 12 seed with 2 losses on the year. Clemson, I think that I have them winning the ACC. I don't trust SMU. I don't trust Miami. I think that they're going to find a way to sneak in there and win the championship. And then this is the one that probably will turn a lot of heads. I have Colorado winning the Big 12. I just think that that's going to be a really fun team to put in there. I think that a lot of people have been just super down on them. They're 7-2. They've done very, very well in the conference so far. BYU is starting to cool off a little bit. So I think that I like their chances a lot. I think that they take care of business, and there's 2 big upsets already right then and there. Most people don't even have those 2 teams in the playoff altogether. So those are my 4 teams at the top. And then I have Oregon at 5. They only lost on the year is Iowa State in the championship round. Notre Dame, I think they take care of business the rest of the season. I have Penn State at 7. They probably should be down a little further than that. I just couldn't I couldn't justify them with only 1 loss on the year and having them below like Alabama or Ole Miss or any of the other teams I'm about to mention. Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss are 8, 9, 10 for me. Boise State sneaks in at 11 with Ashton Gentry. I think that that's just a fun team to put in there. And then the final spot, I have Indiana. I think that they're going to only have 1 loss on the season. They're not going to be able to make it to the championship game. I think it's going to end up being Oregon and OSU. And that means that they'll sneak in with that final wild card spot. And the other teams I have below that, I have Miami, I have BYU, Georgia at 16 with 3 losses on the year. I just don't see how any of those teams – those are the other 3 teams that will probably bring up a lot the rest of the year. But that's it. I got OSU 1, Tennessee 2, Clemson 3, Colorado 4. Those are your conference champions. Oregon 5, Notre Dame 6, Penn State 7, Texas 8, Alabama 9, Ole Miss 10, Boise State 11, and Indiana 12.
Indiana 12. Okay. All right. I'm going to give you mine. I'm with you. I think on a neutral field, I think Ohio State beats Oregon. Look, Oregon won the game. They were at home, and they won by 1 point. But Ohio State turned it over twice, which led to 10 points, easy 10 points for Oregon in that game. Ohio State's a better team than Oregon, and Ohio State is going to beat them in the Big Ten championship game on a neutral field in Indianapolis, in my opinion. So I got Ohio State as a conference champion. I think SMU is going to win the ACC. I've seen them in person this year. They've got that TCU feel about them this year. They like TCU a couple of years ago. They went through the whole quarterback thing. They finally settle on the guy, leads them. Same thing has happened at SMU this year. It was a gutsy move by Lashley, their head coach, to pull a guy who came off a really good year last year. And he said, nope, this isn't getting the job done. So he made the change, and now all of a sudden they're starting to get it going. And you talk about toughness. That's a tough team. I think they're the ACC champion. I think BYU ultimately is going to win the Big 12. I really do. I could see them losing to Colorado. I know what you're saying. Colorado's hard to beat, man, because they can score. There's no doubt about it. And I think Texas wins the now with Ewers healthy, I think Texas wins the SEC. So then after that, Oregon no doubt gets in. Indiana loses at Ohio State because Ohio State's defense is better than Michigan's defense, and Michigan's defense had their way with Indiana over the weekend. Indiana won a game, but Ohio State's defense is even better than Michigan's, and you better score if you're going to beat Ohio State, right? In their only game that they lost, they gave up, 38, 37, 32, 31, something like that. Those games are rare against Ohio State. You have a hard time scoring that many points, and they're going to score points. So I've got Oregon in there, Indiana in there, Penn State in there. I'm with you. I have a hard time, even though I don't see a signature win necessarily for Penn State. They never beat anybody that's in the top 10. That's been documented before. But you have to take them as a one-loss team in the Big Ten. So they're in. All right, so then I have Boise State. I think they're going to win out, although that last game of the year is not going to be an easy game for them. Then you have Alabama. I think Alabama ultimately rights the ship with 2 losses and gets in. I think they only have 1 conference game left. Then you get into areas of, the eye test. Notre Dame, without a doubt, gets in. Although, again, who is Notre Dame beaten? I mean, who's Notre Dame won against this year? Normally they play one of the toughest schedules in the country. But going into this season, everybody that follows Notre Dame said, look, with the schedule this year, if we don't get in the playoffs, then somebody's got to pay the price. Because this schedule is, it's a layup. And a lot of people thought the Florida State game would be the big tester. And, of course, Florida State yesterday just fired their offensive coordinator, their defensive coordinator, and another coach. They've won 1 game. 1 game at Florida State. That's almost impossible to say that and believe it's true. Okay, so now it comes down to, some teams like that are going to have 2 losses or more. Teams like Tennessee, who could have 1 loss. Ole Miss, who's rolling. They're rolling right now. And they've got the talent, and everybody knew it going into the season. Georgia, already 2 losses, plays Tennessee this week. They lose, like Casey, you said. If they lose, they're done. So, and then you get, and in that mix of, okay, who are going to be your last 2 teams? Casey, you brought up Clemson. I can't figure out Clemson. Dabo can't figure out Clemson. There are times where they look like one of the best teams in the country since that first game humiliation loss against Georgia. And then there are other times where they can't get out of their own way. They were lucky to win over the weekend after losing the week before. And then there's Miami. Again, I asked the same thing about Miami that I asked about Notre Dame. Who's Miami beaten this year? Seriously. Who is Miami? Who's Miami? Who is Notre Dame? Who have they beaten? But ultimately, you got to make the call. I'm going to say that Georgia beats Tennessee this coming weekend. Why I'm saying that, I have no idea. But I think they will. Maybe it's just because of their Georgia. And I think Ole Miss wins out and Ole Miss gets in. Casey, any thoughts on any of that?
Well, I can answer who Notre Dame has beaten. They've beaten Texas A&M. They're 15th right now.
That was the first game of the year.
Yeah.
Game. You're right. You're right. Okay, I forgot about that. That's fair. That's fair.
I think
but they also have, but Casey, just to clarify, they also have the worst loss of the one-loss teams.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they lost in Northern Illinois. Okay, so go ahead, please.
But since then they've looked pretty good.
They have.
Pretty good. I would also like to say that they play Army, which, by the way, if they lose to Army, can Army sneak in? That would be crazy.
No doubt about it.
They're sitting at 16 undefeated right now. They'd be 10-0. Just a wild thought to have there. But I mean, I'm kind of with you. The toughest part of this is the ACC conference champion for me.
Yeah.
I think the Big 12, it's just a coin flip between Colorado and BYU. And just depending on preference and how you feel, you either pick the upset or you don't. But the ACC champion, that to me is the tough one. I think that there's going to be at least 4 teams in the Big Ten and 4 teams in the SEC. And then that just kind of muddles the waters a little bit. I think Boise State, if they take care of business the rest of the way, they're a shoe-in. I like Notre Dame a lot. I think they're also a shoe-in too. I think they take care of business against Army. But if they didn't, then that would be something. I mean, I'm kind of with you on most of the picks. It's just the ACC. It's so hard for me to decide. I went with Clemson because I've seen them come back and look pretty good since that one horrific loss that they had.
Yeah, they got killed by Georgia the first game of the year. Yeah.
And they stubbed their toe against Louisville. I mean, they're going to have to play.
Louisville's got a good team. That's the one team we haven't mentioned in all of this, and that's a team that Notre Dame beat by 7, to be fair, back in late September. And it was brought up in the chat that Notre Dame has 3 wins against ranked teams. Texas A&M, I'll give you. Louisville's a top 25 team. That's fair. That's more than fair. And I'm trying to find out who that third win against a ranked team this year would be. They beat Texas A&M. They beat, when they were ranked, Louisville.
They technically beat Navy. That was 24.
Oh. Okay, but Navy was not ranked when they beat them. They were not ranked, at least the rankings I'm looking at. Maybe they were. That's fine. But they've got Army, as you mentioned, who's ranked 16th and undefeated. Army's not going to beat Notre Dame. The only game that could get a little scary if I'm a Notre Dame fan is the USC game. Now, USC's a mess, but they are good at home. And they've been terrible on the road, just absolutely brutal. They've benched their starting quarterback. That's a different topic for another day. But there you have it. So we're giving you who we think is going to be, and of course, this is all changeable. But Casey, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think the Big 12 and the ACC, you have a hard time. Because I do the ACC every week. I have a hard time, to be honest with you. Because I think there's some good teams in the ACC. I think there are more than a handful of good teams in the ACC. I don't know if there's a great team in the ACC. You mentioned Clemson, and we talked about them already. SMU, and then the path moving forward in terms of tiebreakers on who could get in the ACC championship game. I tried to read through this. I mean, you talk about muddying the waters. I read an article yesterday that literally had my eyes rolling up in the back of my head last night with this SEC tiebreaker. You've got all of these teams that are sitting there: A&M, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss. You got to get all these teams, and only 2 of them can play in the title game. And you're close to that now in the ACC because Clemson loses. SMU has not lost in the conference. Their only loss this season was against BYU by 3, and BYU's undefeated. Louisville has only lost a couple of games in the conference. Same sort of thing, right? And then you have Miami, who now has a loss in the conference, the first loss of the year. And man, you talk about we talked about toughness. Georgia Tech absolutely just dominated in every way possible that Miami defense by the way they ran the ball. They didn't need to throw it. They just ran it right down their throat. So I'm with you. I mean, that ACC and that Big 12, it's hard to figure. But I think the percentage is looking, you talked about 4 in the Big 10. Those 4 teams in the Big 10, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, their chances of reaching the college football playoff, all of them are above 92% or more. Go check out the percentages of those those SEC teams. I mean, the only one that is above, I think, 50% is, of course, Texas. All the rest of them are in that 40s, because nobody knows how it's all going to shake out. It's going to be fun to watch. I don't know, Casey, if you agree with me. I think the college game has been so much more fun to watch with a 12-team playoff this year than the pro game.
Well, certainly for me it has been. I know some of the diehards like Jacob, I don't know if he would agree that this season has been the most fun to watch, but for me it certainly has. I think the just fluctuation of these teams going up and down the rankings, it's fun conversations to have because – I mean, usually at this point, you would know your top 4 teams, and it might barely change at the end of the season. But now it's like we've got 12 teams to talk about, and there's at least 20 teams that might deserve a spot or more. So it's just fun to talk about this year more than it ever has been. And on top of that, it's more to watch. You have to watch these games to have these conversations, to be able to have this dialogue. And that just means more football. And I love football, Tom. So it's been a great season to watch college football.
It really has. And it was brought up in the chat, and I appreciate it. Bearcats undefeated national champs, 24-25. I'm assuming that's basketball. And we got a lot of basketball to talk about in the next number of months because, UC looks good. I mean, they look good. They have got a talented roster, man. And I've always been a Wes Miller guy. I know a lot of people out there get all uptight, and he lost a lot of, close games. Mouse Cop wants me to talk about the Cavaliers and how great they are. I'm not Mouse Cop. They're great. They're fun to watch. I'm not talking about the Cavaliers. There are a lot of Cleveland shows that talk about the Cavaliers. But Tennessee, with that matchup with Georgia this week, their quarterback had to leave the game last week. Now, their coach, Heupel, has already said he'll be ready for Saturday. But, they left him out for precautionary reasons. But you better have all systems go if you're playing Georgia, even Georgia that's having a hard time and did not look good. Beck has not had a good year. But they do play defense. Ole Miss is hard to slow down, and they did actually an okay job on Ole Miss. You give up in the 20s in points to Ole Miss, and there's nothing wrong with that. So we're going to wrap it up. I know we got off the bench coming up. The whole cast of characters in there today on this Veterans Day.
That's right. The whole cast and crew is in here. We got Kenner right after this. Jacob and Elliot are sitting here waiting in the wings. Before we wrap it up, Tom, I did want to mention one thing about that Georgia-Tennessee game. The only reason I have in my rankings Georgia losing has nothing to do with their defense. It has everything to do with the offense. I think Carson Beck has been very disappointing this season.
Yeah.
And I just think that Tennessee just has enough on defense to make a difference. It's going to be a close game. I'm not outright saying they're going to get blown out by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't really necessarily believe in the Tennessee quarterback kid. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. It's a difficult name to pronounce, but
yes.
I just think if Georgia does win that game, it just gets crazy. There's so many possibilities in terms of the championship. Like you were saying, it makes you roll your eyes in the back of your head.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to make it as easy as possible. Tennessee, Texas in the championship game. But maybe it gets crazy. Maybe Georgia wins and we have this crazy SEC conversation for the next couple weeks.
I mean, just to give you an idea about that article I was talking about the SEC. It was a college football writer. I can't remember which one it was at The Athletic who covers the SEC. And apparently there's 22 pages that describe the tiebreak about who would play in the SEC championship game. Okay, if you have everybody muddled up there. He had gone at least, and again, let me preface by saying, if all the games moving forward go according to chalk, okay, this is where we would be. And he was already down to the fifth tiebreaker to try and figure out which teams would be in the SEC championship game and which would not. Leave you with this thought. A lot of people believe the number 5 spot is an enviable spot to be in for the playoff. The top 4 are not who are the best 4 teams. The top 4 seeds who get a bye in the opening round of the college football playoff are the 4 Power 4 conference champions. So if SMU wins the ACC, they get a bye. Okay? If BYU wins the Big 12, they get a bye, right? And whoever wins the Big 10 and the SEC. The number 5 team would be playing the number 12 team in the first round at home. Those first round games are on home field advantage. So let's just say right now, Ohio State, which they are, they're the 5 seed. They would play Boise State in the first round. And as the 5 seed, they would play the 4 seed in the second game on a neutral field. That 4 seed is either going to be the ACC champion or the Big 12, more than likely, champion. So that would mean Ohio State's first 2 games of the playoff would be, now granted they'd have to play, they wouldn't get a bye week. But that number 5 seed, okay, it means you're not a conference champion, and chances are you don't have to play in the conference championship game. So you get that week off where everybody else is playing in the conference championship game. Now for me, I'd rather have a bye week, be the conference champion, and go from there. But that's just something to keep an eye on. All right. Again, a happy Veterans Day. It's a somber day in so many ways, but it's a thankful. We have so much to be thankful for, each and every one of us in our lives. Might be going through some tough times and some dark times, but we have so much to be grateful for in our lives and find the goodness. We have so much to be thankful for living in this country that we live in. We may not always get along, but this is where everybody wants to be, is the United States of America. So for those that have fought and served and are serving and will serve the United States of America on this Veterans Day, we say thank you. You guys have a great day. Casey and Luke, thanks so much to both of you guys, and we'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday at noon Eastern Time. God bless you and God bless America. Here we go, off the bench.